cold espresso slid across a marble table. The cup stopped 1 inch from a young man's right hand. Two bodyguards stepped forward and reached inside their jackets. An old woman in a stained apron did not move. She held a small silver coin between her fingers. The coin caught the morning light. The young man stared at it without breathing. His jaw tightened. His knuckles went white. The cafe behind them froze in place. A radio in the corner played an old Italian song very quietly. Outside the window, a black car waited at the curb. Inside the cafe, nobody else dared to look up. The young man finally spoke one single word. He called himself Capo. His name was Marco Bellini. He was 40 years old that morning. Why would an old waitress speak to a don like that? Stay with me on this one. The cafe sat on a quiet corner in Brooklyn. It had a faded green awning and two small tables on the sidewalk. The name above the door was painted in gold letters that had begun to crack. Inside, the floor was checkered black and white. The ceiling fans turned slowly. The smell of fresh espresso and warm bread filled the room every morning. The same 6 tables had stood in the same 6 spots for 40 years. Nothing in the room had changed. The chairs were heavy wood. The cups were small and white. The saucers had a tiny gold rim. Marco Bellini had been coming to this cafe since he was a boy. He used to sit by the window with his grandfather. His grandfather always ordered 2 espressos and 1 small biscuit. His grandfather always sat with his back to the wall. The old man taught Marco how to drink coffee without sugar. He taught Marco how to count the men who walked into a room before he counted the chairs. He taught Marco how to listen to a silence. Marco loved that cafe more than any place in the city. His grandfather died when Marco was 9. After that, Marco came alone. He always sat at the same window table. The waitress had been there from the very first day. Her name was Anna. Her hair was white now and tied back in a tight knot. Her hands were small and rough. She wore a thin gold chain around her neck. She wore the same green apron every day. Her shoes were flat and silent on the tile. She never wrote down an order. She never asked what anybody wanted. She just brought it. Marco had never once needed to speak his order in that cafe. Anna already knew. 1 espresso, no sugar. A small glass of cold water on the side. Always the same. Anna had served Marco's father. Anna had served Marco's grandfather. Anna had even served the man who built the family business in the years before the war. 3 generations of Bellini men had drunk her coffee. She had watched all of them grow old. She had watched some of them die. She had never spoken a single word more than was needed. She had never asked a question. She had never offered an opinion. She was part of the cafe the way the green awning was part of the cafe. Marco was the don now. He had inherited the family 7 years ago. He ran the business from a small office above a fish market 3 blocks from the cafe. His men worked the docks. They worked the construction sites. They worked the trash routes from one end of the borough to the other. Marco was respected. Marco was feared. Marco had not lost a single soldier in 3 years. He was known for being patient. He was known for being quiet. He was known for never raising his voice. His older brother Vincent had been the don before him. Vincent had been a different kind of man. Vincent was loud. Vincent drank too much. Vincent made too many enemies. Vincent broke a bottle over a man's head one summer in front of 100 witnesses and walked out of the bar laughing. Vincent slept with the wife of a rival captain and bragged about it at a wedding. Vincent took risks the family had never taken. Vincent ran the family for 4 years on charm and threats and a kind of wild fearlessness that drew people in and then drove them away. 7 years ago, Vincent had vanished on a Tuesday night between the cafe and his car. The car was found at the curb with the engine still running. The driver's door was open. Vincent's hat was on the seat. There was no blood. There was no body. There was no note. There were no witnesses. The police searched the neighborhood for a week. They found nothing. Vincent was simply gone. The family had searched for years. Marco had spent a fortune trying to find his brother. He had questioned every man on every block. He had paid for information from 3 different countries. He had offered rewards. He had made threats. Nothing came back. Vincent had walked out of that cafe one night and disappeared from the surface of the earth. Marco had finally accepted the silence. He had buried an empty casket 2 years later. He had moved on. He had built his own version of the family. He never asked the cafe about that night. The cafe had nothing to say. Today was Marco's 40th birthday. He had not told anyone. He did not like birthdays. His mother had called him at 6 in the morning to wish him well. He had thanked her and told her he had a busy day. He had hung up the phone and stood at his bedroom window for a long time looking down at the street. He had felt nothing in particular. 40 had arrived the way a Monday arrives. He had walked into the cafe at the usual time with his 2 usual bodyguards. He had sat at the usual window table. He had not asked for anything. Anna had walked to the kitchen behind the bar. She had stayed back there longer than usual. The bodyguards had not noticed. Marco had not noticed. He was reading the newspaper. He was thinking about a shipment that was late. He was thinking about a meeting at noon. He was thinking about an old friend who had asked to see him. He was thinking about how the city had grown quieter in the 7 years he had been gone. He was not thinking about Anna at all. The cafe was quiet. The fan turned. The radio played. Then Anna had walked out of the kitchen with one small white cup. She had crossed the floor without a sound. She had stopped beside Marco's table. She had not set the cup down gently the way she always did. She had slid it across the marble with 2 fingers. The cup had stopped 1 inch from his right hand. The espresso inside was cold. There was no steam. There was no aroma. Anna had stood very straight beside him. Her hands were folded in front of her apron. Her eyes were on his face. She had never looked at him like that in his entire life. The cafe had gone silent. Even the radio seemed to fade. Then she had spoken. She had said 8 words. She had said them in a calm and even voice. "Drink it. Capo. I buried your brother." The words had hit Marco like cold water poured down the back of his neck. His bodyguards had heard her. Both of them had stepped forward. Both of them had reached inside their jackets for the pistols they carried under their arms. The closest one was named Sal. Sal was a heavy man with a thick neck. The other was named Tommy. Tommy was young and quick. Both of them were ready to put 2 bullets into an old woman in an apron right there beside the window. Marco had raised one hand. Just 1 finger, really. Sal and Tommy had stopped. Anna had not flinched. Anna had not blinked. Anna had reached down into the front pocket of her apron. She had pulled out something small and round and silver. She had set it down on the marble next to the cold espresso. The silver thing was a coin. It was not a coin. It was a medallion. It was about the size of a pocket watch. It had a small chain attached. It was old. The metal was worn smooth from decades of being held by a thumb. On one side, there was a saint pressed into the silver. On the other side, there were 3 letters. The letters were the initials of Marco's father. His father's name was Aldo Bellini. Aldo had vanished 30 years ago. Aldo had disappeared on a winter night when Marco was 10 years old. There had never been a body. There had never been a grave. There had never been a single trace. The medallion on the table was Aldo's. Marco knew it the moment he saw it. He had seen it 1,000 times around his father's neck when he was a boy. He had played with the small chain as a child. He had pressed his thumb against the saint and felt the same worn smoothness Anna had just felt. The medallion had vanished the same night his father vanished. Marco had spent his entire adult life believing it was at the bottom of the river somewhere. Marco's mouth went dry. His hand began to shake just a little. He set the newspaper down very slowly. He looked up at Anna. He still had not touched the cold espresso. The cafe was so quiet he could hear the second hand on the clock above the bar. Then Anna sat down. She pulled out the chair across from him. She sat down at his table without permission. Sal took half a step forward again. Marco raised the finger again. Sal stopped again. Anna folded her hands on the marble next to the medallion. She looked at Marco the way a grandmother looks at a child who is about to learn something he cannot unlearn. She smiled very slightly. It was not a kind smile. It was not a cruel smile. It was the smile of a person who has been waiting a very long time. She told him to listen. She told him she would only say this once. She told him the espresso would go warm before she was finished. She told him to drink it anyway when the time came. She said that part twice. Then she began to speak. The cafe stayed silent. A man at the counter, who had been about to take a sip, set his cup down without a sound. A woman at the corner table picked up her purse and walked out the door. Nobody else moved. The two bodyguards stood frozen like statues. They did not put their hands down. They did not pull their pistols. They simply waited. They had no orders. They had never had no orders. Sal was sweating through his shirt. Tommy was staring at the back of Marco's head and waiting for the sign that never came. The morning light through the window had shifted to pale gold. The radio had finished its song and started another one. The traffic outside moved past the window in a slow line. Marco picked up the espresso. He held it. He did not drink. He set it back down. The cup made the smallest sound on the marble. Anna nodded once. Anna told him she was not a waitress. She had never been a waitress. She had been placed in this cafe 40 years ago by a council of men whose names Marco would not recognize. She had been given one job. She had been told to watch. She had been told to remember. She had been told to wait. She had been sworn to silence until a specific day. That day was today. That day was Marco's 40th birthday. The council had picked the date 30 years ago. The council had decided that on the day Marco turned 40, he would be told the truth. Not before. Not after. On that exact morning. In that exact cafe. By that exact woman. With that exact cup of cold espresso. The medallion had been kept in her apron pocket for 30 years. She had taken it off Marco's father with her own hands. She had taken it the night she buried him in a small grove behind a country church in New Jersey. She had taken it because she had been ordered to. She had taken it because the man who gave the order had loved Aldo Bellini like a brother. The man who gave the order had been Marco's grandfather. Marco stopped breathing. He felt his vision narrow to the small silver circle on the marble. His grandfather had been the most beloved man in his life. His grandfather had taught him to count chairs and read silences. His grandfather had wept openly the day Aldo vanished. His grandfather had spent the last years of his life looking out the window of this very cafe with hollow eyes. His grandfather had told Marco 100 times that the man who took Aldo would burn in hell. His grandfather had given the order himself. Marco felt something tear loose inside his chest. He did not move. He did not speak. He let Anna keep going. He had to let her keep going. Anna kept going. She told him there had been a war inside the family 30 years ago. She told him Aldo had been ready to change the rules. Aldo had wanted to end the protection rackets in the neighborhood. Aldo had wanted the family to leave the cafes and the bakeries and the small shops alone. Aldo had wanted to take the family out of the trash routes and into something cleaner. The old men had not agreed. The old men had voted in secret. The old men had decided Aldo had to go. Marco's grandfather had cast the deciding vote. Marco's grandfather had cried for 30 years afterward and never told a single living soul. He had never told Marco. He had never told Marco's mother. He had carried that vote alone until the day he died. He had only told one person before he died. He had told Anna. He had told Anna because Anna had buried the body. Anna and one other man. The other man was Vincent. Vincent was 16 years old when he helped Anna dig the grave behind the country church. Vincent was the one who later begged his grandfather for the truth. Vincent had been told everything when he turned 30. Vincent had carried that secret for 10 more years. Vincent had finally cracked. If you are still with me at this point, hit that subscribe button. Trust me, this story is only just beginning. The cup on the marble was still cold. The medallion was still bright. Marco had not moved a muscle. The bodyguards had not lowered their hands. The cafe was still silent. Anna kept talking. She told Marco that 7 years ago Vincent had decided to confess. Vincent had decided to tell Marco the truth about their father. Vincent had decided to tell Marco who really gave the order. Vincent had been ready to break a 30-year silence. Vincent had walked out of this very cafe on a Tuesday night with one envelope in his pocket. The envelope contained the location of the country church. The envelope contained Anna's name. The envelope contained a confession in Vincent's own handwriting. Vincent had never made it to his car. 2 men had been waiting beside it. 2 men had been sent by the same council that placed Anna in the cafe 40 years ago. The council had been listening to Vincent. The council had known about the envelope. The council had decided Vincent had to go the same way Aldo had gone. Anna had been ordered to clean the table after Vincent left. Anna had been the one to find the second envelope Vincent had hidden under his usual chair. Anna had been the one to take that envelope to the country church behind New Jersey. Anna had been the one to dig the second grave beside the first. Anna had been the one to lay Vincent down beside his father. Anna had not cried. Anna had not prayed. Anna had simply done the work she had been asked to do. Then Anna had walked back to the cafe and made coffee the next morning as if nothing had happened. She had served Marco his espresso that very morning. Marco had not noticed anything different. Anna had not given him any reason to. Anna had carried 2 graves for 7 years. Anna had carried 3 secrets for 30. Anna had been told to wait until Marco turned 40. Anna had been told that on Marco's 40th birthday she could finally speak. The council had decided that Marco needed to know everything on this exact morning, because the council needed Marco to make a choice. The council needed Marco to decide who he was. Anna had been chosen for this task because she had been the most loyal soldier the family had ever produced. Anna was not somebody's grandmother. Anna had killed 17 men before she ever poured a cup of coffee in this cafe. Anna had been a sworn witness and a sworn executioner for the family since before Marco was born. The apron and the white hair and the small silver chain were the perfect disguise. Nobody ever looked at the old waitress. Nobody ever counted her among the dangerous people in the room. Marco's grandfather had told him 100 times to count the men in a room. He had never once told him to count the women. That was the lesson Marco was learning now. Anna paused. She picked up the cold espresso. She slid it back across the marble until it touched Marco's hand. She told him to drink. She told him that everything he had built in 7 years, as Dawn sat on top of her silence. She told him that the moment she chose to speak the whole structure would shake. She told him she had already begun to speak. She told him there was no way to put the words back into her mouth. She told him the council that had placed her in this cafe 40 years ago was now waiting for his answer. The council wanted to know if Marco would continue his grandfather's path or his father's path. The council wanted to know if Marco would protect the old rules or break them the way Aldo had wanted to break them. The council had not decided anything yet. The council was watching this table right now. There was a man at the counter in a gray hat. There were 2 men in the black car at the curb. There was a woman with a phone at the corner table. None of them were customers. All of them were waiting. Marco picked up the cup. His hand was steady now. He held the cold espresso to his lips. He drank it in one slow swallow. The taste was bitter and old, and exactly what he had been drinking his whole life. He set the cup down without a sound. He looked at the medallion on the marble. He looked at Anna. He did not speak for a long moment. The cafe held its breath. The radio played. The fan turned. Outside the window, the black car had not moved. Marco thought of his grandfather's hands. He thought of the way those hands had taught him to hold a knife. He thought of the way those hands had wiped tears from his cheeks at Aldo's empty funeral. He thought of how many of those tears had been real. He thought of how many had been a man performing his own grief for a child who could not yet read a silence. Marco had read a silence today for the first time in his life. Marco finally spoke. He told Anna she would walk out of the cafe alive. He told Anna he had no quarrel with a woman who had carried his father's body to a grave with her own hands. He told her he had no quarrel with a soldier who had only done the work she had been asked to do. He told her he would visit the country church before the sun went down. He told her he would dig up nothing. He would leave the graves the way she had made them. He told her he would honor the work. He told her he would honor his father. He told her he would honor his brother. He told her he would honor even his grandfather, because a soldier honors the chain of command even when the chain has crushed his own family. He thanked her. He thanked her in the way his grandfather had taught him to thank a soldier. He used the old words. He used the words that had not been spoken in this cafe for 40 years. Anna heard the old words. Her eyes filled with tears for the first time in 30 years. She did not let them fall. She placed both palms flat on the marble between them. She bowed her head 1 inch. That 1 inch was the deepest bow Anna had given any man since the war. Marco saw it. Marco understood it. Marco bowed his head 1 inch in return. Then Marco stood up. He picked up the medallion. He held it in his palm for a long moment. The silver was warm now from Anna's pocket and the sun through the window. He pressed his thumb against the worn saint the way his father had pressed his thumb against the same saint 1,000 times. He could feel the shape of his father's thumb in the metal. He could feel the shape of his grandfather's thumb under that. He could feel the shape of the man before his grandfather under that. The medallion was a chain of thumbs going back 100 years. Marco put it around his own neck. He tucked it under his collar, where his father had carried it for the first half of Marco's life. He felt the small weight of it land against his chest. It was heavier than it looked. He understood now why his father had walked with that small forward tilt. The medallion pulled the man who wore it just slightly toward the ground. He nodded to Sal and Tommy. They lowered their hands at last. Sal exhaled so hard he almost laughed. Tommy crossed himself once. Both of them looked at Marco as if they had never really seen him before. They had walked in behind a Don. They were walking out behind a different man. They did not yet know what kind of man. Neither did Marco. He looked once at the man at the counter in the gray hat. The man held his gaze for 2 seconds and then slowly nodded. He looked at the black car at the curb. The car nodded too in its way. The driver tipped his hat through the windshield. The woman at the corner table who had picked up her purse came back inside. She sat down at her table. She picked up her phone. She put it back down. She had a small notebook in her hand. She wrote 1 line in the notebook. She closed it. Marco walked out of the cafe. He did not look back. The bell above the door rang once. The cafe stayed silent for another full minute after he was gone. Then Anna picked up the empty cup. She wiped the marble with her apron. She walked to the kitchen behind the bar. She set the cup in the sink. She washed her hands very slowly. She dried them on a clean white towel. She hung the towel on the same hook it had hung on for 40 years. She did not look at the hook. Her hands knew the way. Marco kept his promise that same afternoon. He drove out to New Jersey alone. He left Sal and Tommy at a diner near the highway. He took the medallion off his neck and held it on the seat beside him. The country church was small and white and old. The grove behind it was thick with maple and pine. Marco walked in among the trees without a shovel. He walked until he felt the right ground under his shoes. He did not know how he knew. He simply knew. There was a small flat stone, the size of a hand pressed into the earth. There was another flat stone beside it. The two stones were the only markers. They had no names. They had no dates. They had only a small saint carved into each one. The same saint that was pressed into the medallion. Marco knelt between the two stones. He did not pray. He did not weep. He set his palm on his father's stone. He set his other palm on his brother's stone. He stayed like that for almost an hour. When he stood up, his knees were stiff, and the medallion was warm in his hand. He put it back around his neck. He walked out of the grove. He drove back to the city in silence. The next morning, the cafe opened at the usual hour. The fan turned. The radio played. The smell of fresh espresso and warm bread filled the room. The 6 tables stood in the same 6 spots. Anna was behind the bar in her green apron. Her white hair was tied back in the same tight knot. The chain around her neck was the same. Nothing in the room had changed. A young man came in at the usual time. He had a newspaper under his arm. He had 2 bodyguards behind him. He sat at the window table. He did not order. Anna walked to the kitchen behind the bar. She came back with 1 small white cup. She set it down gently on the marble. The espresso inside was steaming hot. The cup made the softest sound when it touched the table. Marco picked it up. He did not look at Anna. He drank his coffee. He read his paper. The fan turned. The radio played. The morning light came through the window in a pale gold. Outside the window, a black car waited at the curb. It had been waiting there since before sunrise. It would wait there for the rest of his life. He had made his choice. He would learn to live with the watchers. He would learn to drink the coffee they served him. He would learn to count the women in the room. He would honor the graves behind the country church. He would never speak of them to anyone. He would carry the medallion under his collar until the day he died. He would teach the next Don to count chairs. He would never teach him to read this silence. That lesson would belong only to him. In the years that followed, Marco changed the family slowly. He pulled the soldiers off the small cafes one by one. He pulled them off the bakeries. He pulled them off the corner shops where the old women bought their bread. He did it without speeches. He did it without warnings. He did it the way his grandfather had taught him to do everything. Quietly, the council in the cafe watched. The man at the counter in the gray hat watched. The woman with the notebook watched. None of them ever said a word to Marco. None of them ever made a move against him. He had earned his silence by drinking a cold cup of espresso at the right table on the right morning. He had passed a test he had not known he was taking. Anna worked behind the bar for 6 more years. She poured Marco's coffee every morning at the usual time. She never spoke of the medallion again. She never spoke of the country church. She never spoke of his father or his brother. She nodded to him when he came in. She nodded to him when he left. That was all. On a Tuesday in early winter, she did not come down to open the cafe. The owner went upstairs to find her. She was in her small bed under a clean white sheet. Her hands were folded on her chest. There was a small photograph beside the bed of a young woman in a soldier's uniform. The young woman had the same dark eyes Anna had carried for 91 years. Marco came to the funeral. He stood at the back. He did not speak to anyone. He pressed his thumb against the medallion under his collar and bowed his head 1 inch. That 1 inch said everything that needed to be said. The cafe would outlive them all.